Coaching talk has dominated the Nebraska landscape, but portal season is in full swing. We assess the Huskers' most pressing needs next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And you can start this basketball season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
All right, welcome. It is Wednesday. Connor Happer here from 1620 The Zone. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Last week was a busy week. This week is a busy week, all while Nebraska still continues its preparations for the Pinstripe Bowl. There was a Pinstripe Bowl press conference yesterday, which I thoroughly enjoyed, to be honest.
We need to talk about that a little bit, maybe in this show.
Yeah, let's do that. It was an hour of comedy and takes and things like that on the Yes Network. And Matt Rhule dropping New York things, so we'll get there. Coaching news, you mentioned it. Obviously, over the last couple of days, it's been busy there. John Butler is Nebraska's permanent defensive coordinator, and it appears as if Nebraska is going to bring in Phil Snow in a more permanent associate head coach capacity and add Terry Bradden from the Kansas City Chiefs as their defensive line coach, and Phil Simpson, who we've mentioned before, as well as he was here a couple of years ago. And then there's the portal, as you mentioned in the cold open, Mitch. So let's talk about in this episode today the departures and the holes that those leave on the roster and where Nebraska may go next.
Yeah, so far this week, and the portal opened officially for undergraduates on Monday. So far this week, a handful of walk-ons have gone into the portal, and this is going to be the process as Nebraska gets down to 105 players over the next several months. One significant departure to talk about over that occurred this week, and that happened on Monday. Keona Davis, a promising freshman defensive end, played as a true freshman, avoided a red shirt. He went into the portal. So we'll get into that when we talk about Nebraska's defensive line. We are going to assess, as you said, all of the positions and how they look for Nebraska as it enters this time when players aren't just going into the portal, they're coming out of the portal. But it's not been all bad news for Nebraska at all this week in the portal world. So with Simpson coming back to Lincoln, he spent the 2023 season at Nebraska, then 2024 at Florida State. No coincidence that we've seen messages from defensive players Amari Sanders and Vincent Shavers on social media to reaffirm their commitment to Nebraska. Simpson was essential in bringing those two to Nebraska, along with Floridians Ja'Cory Barney, Willis McGahee, and Larry Tarver in that 2024 class. And then another player from the 2024 class did kind of the same thing on Monday, and that's Dylan Raiola, Nebraska's quarterback. Let's not forget about him. Way back on Monday night, after a fair amount of concern from Nebraska Football Nation, Raiola posted on Instagram that he is all in on Nebraska. We would have been talking about this in our Tuesday show, but there was breaking news on the coaching front, and we spent an entire episode Tuesday night breaking down all of that stuff with John Butler and Phil Snow and Terry Bradden. So here we are getting back to this Dylan Raiola news. Connor, what should we make of all this? What should Nebraska fans make of all of this as players reaffirm their commitments to the school and Keona Davis and others go in?
Yeah, I think there was some consternation over the last, I guess, 10 days or so, really since last Monday, which, kind of signaled the first Monday of the offseason, and grad transfers started going into the portal and stuff like that. And guys started sort of declaring their intent. And for the record, Nebraska is not done. There will be more people from Nebraska's roster that enter the portal as early as today. So
have to be.
Yeah, absolutely. There will be, and it's not just like walk-ons who, didn't make an impact on the field too. I would imagine that there are people who have played that are still going to go into the portal as well. So like that is still a thing. And every one of them, sort of garners their own individual response, I suppose. But like you said, Mitch, like this was always sort of going to happen. So kind of buckle up, I guess. And then like, I think what makes it maybe easier a little bit this week is that you're starting to hear more and more about what Nebraska is going to do to add, whether it be linebacker visitors, wide receiver visitors, guys that are attached to coaches, guys that haven't even entered the portal yet, or are just entering the portal, guys who, Nebraska staff has a connection with, whatever it might be. Like people are going to want to come to Nebraska too. I know it doesn't seem like it at times, but people are going to want to come to Nebraska too.
So speaking of that, this is off the cuff, but this wasn't planned to have this little aside right here. But on Tuesday, a familiar name went into the transfer portal from the state of Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
His name is Nwaneri, and he was a 5-star plus. What other words can we attach to this?
5-star plus. Yeah, plus with the plus side.
Bonus. Yeah. In the 24 class, along with Raiola and the other 5 stars in that class. And he redshirted at Missouri this year, and he was a target of Nebraska in the spring of 2023, visited Nebraska, ultimately settled on Mizzou over Oklahoma, Oregon, Tennessee, other programs that do well in recruiting the 5-star landscape. Well, his high school coach, after he signed with Missouri, Jamar Mosey, came to Nebraska to be a part of Matt Rhule's staff. And Jamar Mosey brought a whole group of Kansas City area players. We're talking about Isaiah Mosey, who was committed to Oregon. This is Jamar's son. Not surprising that he is now in the fold for Nebraska as a signee as of this month. Dawson Merritt, the linebacker who was committed to Alabama and is now in the fold for Nebraska this month. And then Julian Marks, the offensive tackle from the Kansas City area, who was a flip from Kansas. All of these players are connected to Jamar Mosey. And none of them, I suppose with the exception of Isaiah, have a stronger connection to Jamar Mosey than Nwaneri. So what I will say is be on the lookout for this, because I think people nationally see that Nwaneri is in the portal, and you say, okay, is he going to Alabama? Is he going to Texas A&M? Is he going to LSU? The places, again, that generally compete for 5-star talent. I'm not saying that he's coming to Nebraska, but I'm not saying that he's not. I think there's a real possibility there, and there's a real connection between Mosey and Nwaneri, and he's somebody to keep an eye out for as the portal starts to turn players out the other direction.
Yeah, I was sort of going through it in my head the other day, thinking like, Nebraska's going to get transferred, like they'll fill the 104, right? You're talking about replacing guys with guys, right? But in some areas, it's just a little bit more dire. It's a little bit more desperate than others.
D-line.
And D-line is one of them. And I think O-line is one of them as well. And we could sort of talk about that as we go on throughout the show. But there's a couple places where, you might be a little bit disappointed if Nebraska doesn't go out and find like a bona fide, like a starter, like a power, a starter at another Power 5 school to have at their school next year. So that's some of the things we're sort of looking out for. And then the other thing, just on the portal in general, like going into the portal is not necessarily taking off on the jet anymore. It's more like arriving at the airport, like you're not gone yet when you're in the portal, as we saw with Emmett Johnson this week, and we'll see if that happens with anybody else. So that's a piece of this too. It's players are using it are using the portal, entering the portal for leverage, for money in some cases, and for to see where they stand in a lot of cases. Like everybody's got a different reason for doing it, but you're going to see it like a lot of people are going to go in the portal, and a lot of people are going to go back to the schools that they were trying to transfer from. So that's another piece of this too.
Yeah. I expect that Terry Bradden, the new D-line coach, and probably Phil Simpson too, as the edge rushers coach, there's some mixing between the two of them and what positions they might coach. We'll be seeking a conversation with one Williams Nwaneri, although maybe the only connection that he needs at Nebraska is Mosey, Jamar, and Isaiah. So it's something to watch.
Davis, and have a conversation with Keona Davis too.
Absolutely. They will. If you notice and you go check out Terry Bradden's social media, and I was new to looking at Terry Bradden's social media until late last night. He did quickly follow Keona Davis on X for whatever purpose that may serve. It may serve none. Keona Davis may be entirely set on departing Nebraska, going to a warmer climate, going somewhere that's going to pay him twice what Nebraska's paying him in the NIL world. Or maybe he's not, and maybe he would be open to a conversation with Nebraska's new defensive line coach, because some players, when they go in the portal, Nebraska, that's it. You if you wanted to come back like Emmett Johnson did, like Jamari Butler did a few years ago, there's not really that opportunity for you. Like, it's a clean break. Others, that's not, the door is still open. Keona Davis would be somebody, I think I can say this, I think without knowing it, based on something that Matt Rhule or a coach has told me, I believe that Keona Davis could come back if he wanted to come back. Yeah,
for sure. Okay, we'll take a timeout. We still have plenty of things to cover this week. A reminder to get your questions in for the mailbag, which we'll do that show on Thursday. We'll be back after this on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. All right, it's Apper here for the FanDuel Sportsbook, and get ready to tackle NFL action this weekend with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, futures on the NFL, or just the straight up spread bets on pre-Sunday afternoon. All in one place. You can do that in the FanDuel Sportsbook app. So even if you get that hunch in the middle of the game has already started. The fantasy lineups lock at noon. Maybe it's 12:30 and you get a hunch. That's where FanDuel comes into play for you. You get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Head to FanDuel.com today. Once again, that's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Okay, welcome back on this Wednesday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I am Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone is with me. Connor, you mentioned at the top of the show the teleconference, the television show on the Yes Network that there's going to be another one next week, by the way. That's the word.
I saw this. I heard this. And Rhule is talking to the local media once a week as well, in
Thursday.
person.
He's going to talk tomorrow on Thursday. Yeah, I will sadly miss that. I'm going to be out of pocket for about 48 hours here at the end of this week. So I'll be watching that from afar, hopefully with a drink in my hand or something like that. Nice. I'm going to be in a cold weather environment, so I don't know. It's not going to get too tropical, but Rhule's going to talk on Thursday, so we'll get to hear him comment about John Butler, and perhaps Nebraska will have the Phil Snow and Terry Bradden announcements ready to go. Otherwise, you won't hear about them from Matt Rhule if the contracts, the background checks and everything are not complete. But regardless, you'll hear more, I'm sure, about his happiness with going to New York. So lots of conversation on that Yes Network call about Matt Rhule and dropping like neighborhood references. And man, I grew up on the Lower East Side, and my dad took me here, and we do this and that. And he's an advocate for New York. Like, the city of New York might want to create like a TV commercial. They could put it on the Yes Network with Matt Rhule talking about tourism in the city or something.
Well, that's sort of how it ended. Like, I don't think anybody outside of the Nebraska media knew on that call that Rhule had such a deep appreciation for New York, and so Rhule was trying to he was like, yeah, like I'm not just a guy who like likes to go to Times Square and get a hot dog. Like I love
Radio City Rockettes.
He goes, I grew up in Park Slope, 32nd and 2nd, lived on Roosevelt Island, had all my buddies from Roosevelt Island. What are we doing? Are you coming over? What are we going to do? Even started talking faster, Rhule talks fast, but he started talking faster a little bit. Like he was on one. It was classic Matt Rhule at that thing.
I wonder what it was like for him to be on the Yes Network. I didn't even think of that until right now. But
he's probably really loved it.
Well, no, he's a devoted Mets fan. Matt Rhule is a Mets fan. So
his allegiance is kind of, he once claimed that he was a Royals fan as well. All right. Very interesting.
Well, okay, maybe that's true. So we're going all in on this call.
Yeah, it's off. Yeah.
So there was also a Zoom call with media, and you could see they had the regular TV setup with the desk in the Yes Network. It was like a Yankees pregame show, and they brought in Troy Dannon and they brought in Blake James, the BCAD, and Bill O'Brien was there. And Bill O'Brien was great, by the way. Like he's so blunt. Like
he just talk about him too. Yes,
he's more blunt. He's the only coach I've met this year or seen this year who's more blunt than Dana Holgerson. And he's like talking about the 105. He's like, who made that rule?
Like, whose idea is this? This is the stupidest thing ever.
Yeah,
awesome.
So there was media in the queue, and we were all on a Zoom. And when people wanted to ask a question, they would raise their hand, and so their picture would go to the front, and you could see that they were in line to ask a question. And our friend Robin Washut from Husker Online was one of the first in line to ask a question. And I texted Robin as he was in line to get to Matt Rhule, and I told him, and he turned this down. I told him this was a joke. I said, I will buy you a meal in New York for $100, up to $100, if you go on the Yes Network Live and ask Matt Rhule what he thinks about Juan Soto signing with the Mets for $765 million. He didn't do it.
He did though. I mean, Robin is a devoted Giants fan. So when this was on the Yes Network Live, we went to Robin Washut's basement, and he had all New York Giants pictures in the background. It's like people are thinking, what the heck is going on? Is this guy a plant? Like, is he trying to impress us? What's the deal? I love this press conference. There was people asking. There was a guy, a Boston College media person, who asked Matt Rhule if Dylan Raiola was going to enter the transfer portal.
Could you confirm that he will be the starter on December 28th in the Pinstripe Bowl? That was the question. And
he's at practice right now. He's like 10 steps away from me.
Yeah. I commented on that. And I kind of wish I hadn't commented on it, because I am a reporter, and far be it from me to like throw shade at other reporters for asking questions, even if I feel like the question is slightly out of line. Look, Dylan had gone on social media the night before and given the bat signal, the all in. But good for the BC writer. He's the 24/7 writer for BC, runs that site out there. Good for him for being aggressive and asking the question. And Matt Rhule's a big boy, and he can handle the question. There was a question from Nebraska right after that kind of I don't know. I'm not going to, whatever. It was regarding
Emmett Johnson's status.
Yeah. It was like Emmett Johnson never went in the portal, people.
Correct.
Like he never went in. He never came out. It all happened before the portal was open. And like, he's playing in the game, obviously. Like when the teleconference started and the host of the show highlighted players to watch in the game, they talked about Dylan Raiola and Emmett Johnson. And then those are the two players that Matt Rhule fields questions about, whose status is in doubt because of the transfer portal, supposedly. So the whole thing, it briefly like veered off the rails, but in like kind of a comical way, if you wanted to look at it that way. But can't wait for the next Yes Network TV show featuring Bill O'Brien and Matt Rhule. They could do, the two of them could do a sitcom, I think.
Totally. I mean, there was some good banter between the two. Like, he tried to make a dinner bet at one point,
Rhule did.
And Rhule like dropped he was like, feast of the 7 fishes and like the whole thing. It was perfect. It was the perfect setting for Matt Rhule.
He talked about his daughters Vivian and Leona shopping at the American Girl store while they're in New York over Christmas, and how Rhule is dreading that credit card statement.
He said the American Girl store has never seen anything like Vivian and Leona Rhule. So.
All right.
Which okay. I hope to never relate to that, but I probably will in 8 years or something like that.
Oh, you definitely will.
Yeah.
Like you're storming down the path to relate to that, right? Like right now, everything is. If you didn't want to relate to it, then you needed to think about some other things that you did, like within the last couple of years. So no,
well, I have time, at least for the moment. I have time, and I'm trying to just wait that out as long as I can.
All right, should we just take a break since we've talked entirely about the Yes Network / New York Yankees Pinstripe Bowl teleconference from Tuesday. And when we come back, we will get to conversation about Nebraska's biggest needs in the transfer portal. That is coming up next on the Locked On Nebraska pod. All right, Mitch Sherman here to tell you about Omaha Steaks, because nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle, save 50% off gourmet gifts site-wide at omahasteaks.com. And for you, our listeners and viewers of the Locked On Nebraska pod, get a $30 reward card when you shop early. Just enter the promo code COLLEGE. Omaha Steaks, with 5 generations of experience, consistently delivers the world's best steak experience. And gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated packages that start at $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouthwatering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com and get $30 off, an additional $30 off by using the promo code COLLEGE when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 with the promo code COLLEGE. omahasteaks.com. Minimum purchase may apply.
All right, welcome back. Connor Hepper, Mitch Sherman with you. So let's talk about the portal stuff. Although I did really love talking about the Pinstripe Bowl press conference, of which there will be at least one more before the game in 2 weeks, and before Nebraska leaves in less than 2 weeks at this point. But portal needs. So we don't know who is all going in yet, but we have a pretty good sense of what the roster is going to look like. I think, as we mentioned earlier, Mitch, like you look first at the offense and defensive line. Nebraska lost a handful of defensive linemen in the transfer portal, and maybe they get 1 or 2 of them back. And offensive line was older. Last year, you're going to lose a couple players who have been around for a long time, including Ben Scott, and Bryce Benhart. And this might lead to a conversation about Turner Corcoran as well and his eligibility status. But I think you sort of look there. The question is, where does Nebraska need like a bona fide guy, maybe more? But how do you look at that offensive and defensive line situation at the moment?
Yeah. Let's burn through this. So back on the defensive line for Nebraska, after the flurry of exits, you have Elijah Judy, Riley Van Poppel, and Cam Lenhart with experience. That's it. That's what you got. And that's not the kind of depth that Nebraska wants on the defensive line. It's not a great welcome to Terry Bradden when he walks into that room. We don't know what scheme Nebraska is going to run, if it's going to be a 4-man front, if it's going to be a 3-man front, if it's going to be multiple, whatever. But there are some backups that Nebraska likes with, quality young players like Mason Goldman, Sua Lefotu, Jordan Ochoa, Ashton Murphy. There's the big German David Hufkin, who's played football for all of 3 months. And then you're bringing in Malcolm Simpson, the true freshman from Texas. But they have to hit the portal. This to me, in thinking about it this week, is the number one priority. Obviously, if you could get a guy like Williams Nwaneri, that would shore up some of your concerns, but you still need to go to the portal for even more. You just need bodies, and you need some way to get good production from that position group.
Yeah, that's definitely one where it feels like you need a couple different types of guys, not only in like bodies and athletically, but also sort of what I was talking about earlier. Like if you could, if Nwaneri comes out of the portal and you end up getting him like that, okay, that's great. He's your anchor sort of at that position, but then you probably still need you need to supplement it with a little bit more experience still after that. Maybe some older guys who have been around other programs for a long time. So then there's that. And then there's the offensive line, where you have Justin Evans back, you have Henry Lutovsky back, you have Gunnar Gatula back. And then you have a couple guys who have been on the shelf with injuries, either throughout their career or this year. I guess Turner Corcoran would fit into that category as well. And then Teddy Prohaska. And then young guys who haven't really played yet, like Grant Bricks and Xander Rougeroli and Sam Sledge. I would imagine one or two of those guys is going to go probably immediately ascend to a starting spot next year. But like, what else needs to come in that offensive line room?
I think Nebraska needs to look for a way so it doesn't have to put a redshirt freshman immediately into a starting spot. It happened this year with Gunnar Gatula, but if you want to be a top half of the Big Ten offensive line, I think you need to do it with experience. I think you need to do it with players who've been in the trenches before. And if, as the season goes on, there's injuries, which there always are on the offensive line and the defensive line, then you have young guys who are ready. But it's not ideal for Nebraska to go into the 2025 season and to say, all right, Grant Bricks or Preston Taumua, you've got to be ready to start right now because we don't have anybody else behind you. Like the reason that these players came to Nebraska in part was so they could get the right coaching and the right opportunity to develop and become starters at some point in their career. And especially for a guy like Bricks, who had so much weight to gain and so much to learn about being a pass protector, that ideal time is not August 30th of 2025. By the way, we will get a Big Ten schedule, a Nebraska schedule for the 2025 season today. Today on Wednesday, that is coming out on BTN. So you will know Nebraska's conference dates for games. Be on the lookout for that. They have to go in the portal. They have to go in the portal on the O-line.
No doubt about it. Just shifting around to some other positions to highlight them. How about quarterback? I mean, Raiola's back. TJ Lateef is in. I think you don't count Heinrich Harburg as part of that group, like pretty much period anymore. Like maybe he could come in a pinch, but I don't think you want that. I think they're gonna use his time getting more proficient at athletic endeavors, like try to do some other things. So I wouldn't count him at that position. And then your TBD with Jalen Gramstad. At this point, is that a position where you need to add a body in the transfer portal?
Yeah, because if TJ Lateef is your number 2 guy going into the season, it'd be nice if you had Danny Kalen, but he went into the portal, and it's understandable why he did because he's in the same class as Dylan Raiola. But if you go into the season with Lateef as your number 2 guy, unless he's bringing some things that, like, unless he's like the next Raiola, which it doesn't. I think he has more room to grow. He's not there yet as far as being that ready to play. I don't think right now that Nebraska would be comfortable with Lateef as a true freshman, one snap away from being the starting quarterback. Like if that happens a year from now in Dylan's junior year, great. Right. But right now, Nebraska needs somebody in between those two who can make it feel comfortable. And the question is like, who? I've watched as quarterbacks have gone into the portal this week and assessed, tried to put all of them into the spot of making a decision. Would you look at Nebraska as a possibility? And all of them so far that I've seen would probably want to go somewhere where they expect to be the starter.
Yeah, I think you have to sort of filter through the first wave of them. And we're in that right now, at least the first wave, maybe like the first 2 or 3 waves of quarterbacks that go into the portal, and then it sort of trickles down and then the starters are sort of settled in. Cause that's, I mean, if you're a team, and Nebraska's thankfully not one of these teams right now, but like if you're a team looking for a starting quarterback in the transfer portal, you kind of have to do that first, after the coaching moves and whatever else happens in the offseason. So you do that first and then you build off of that. So I think we're in that stage right now. So Nebraska, I think I agree with you, Mitch. Like, would be best served to add somebody, but who and what kind of person is that? It's a guy who's looking for sort of a unique and a different opportunity, and probably a guy who's been playing at a little bit of a lower level or a backup at a lower level. And Nebraska says, "All right, we could trust you to come in a pinch."
There are FCS quarterbacks out there who would love to have,
Totally.
or who would be looking for like a Big Ten experience and to just kind of roll the dice on what the playing time might be. So I think that's where they'll end up looking and having the best chance at finding someone. All right, let's go to linebacker. A couple more position groups we want to highlight here before we get out of the show. So Nebraska at linebacker, we're talking about portal needs. Nebraska has Vincent Shavers and Willis McGahee, who it loves. Like, these are two future stars on the Nebraska defense. And then there are incoming freshmen Dawson Merritt, who we mentioned from Kansas City, the Alabama flip, and Christian Jones, who should not be overlooked as, I think, a future big-time player out of Omaha West Side. They're going to be expected to play, those two, in 2025. I don't want to overlook the likes of Dylan Rogers, Gage Stenger, Maverick Noonan, Ishmael Smith-Flores, but they've been in the program and have not done a lot yet, in part because of injuries and just the need to develop. So where's Nebraska at? It's an extremely young group. They're going to need to find players in the portal to fill this thing out for Rob Dvoracek and Phil Simpson.
Yeah, that is not a position, like wide receiver or like defensive line or offensive line, where you're looking around and you're like, well, they need to find a guy who was a starter at a Power 5 school last year. That is, the linebacker is not that type of position for me. It's one where you could use some older, experienced depth pieces, not necessarily like, hey, we got to go find a guy who could be all conference for us right now.
Sure.
Because of what you mentioned, you have Shavers and McGahee, who you love, and then you also love Merritt and Jones, who are coming up as well. And so you're looking at older, experienced depth. A guy like Stephon Thompson honestly would fit this category perfectly, who went into the portal after Tony White left. I think he was a good depth piece for them and ended up coming on at the end of last year, but he's in the portal, so you can find a replacement for him as well.
Guy we didn't name because of the uncertainty around him is Javen Wright. So he's played 6 years, or been in the program for 6 years. His first 3 years, he played just 3 games. Has had the battle with blood clots throughout his career that resurfaced in 2024, caused him to miss all contact in practice, and then he would reduce his medication as the week went on, and he'd be allowed to play in games, which is just no way to play here last season. So he's a great candidate to get a 7th year of eligibility if he so chooses to seek it. We talked earlier about Turner Corcoran, or mentioned him. He's eligible for a 6th year, but Javen Wright would be the lone 7th year senior on the Nebraska team if he goes that route. But just not really a guy that you can necessarily count on to be there because of the long history there. If he is there and he's healthy, then he's a great piece to have, and he shores up some of this concern, I would say.
Yeah, and then quickly before we get out of here, like punter, long snapper. I think they have their kicker situation all shored up with John Hull. So like there's a couple things in there too.
John Hull. Every time for the rest of the off, for all of the off season, we have to do it.
Yeah. So
Thank you, Gus.
There are some things in there too where Nebraska might be interested in a portal guy. Okay. You have a thought on that before we get out of here?
I agree with you. Long snapper was an issue this year. Aiden Flegge is back, but you saw the Iowa game. They need to upgrade that spot.
No doubt about it. That's it for us today. And once again, get your mailbag questions in for Thursday. We will answer those on the show, and then we'll have a bit of a crossover show on Friday with our Boston College counterpart over at Locked On BC. Thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen today. For your first listen, and for your second listen, check out the Locked On Big Ten podcast, where Craig puts the Big Ten first. Find Locked On Big Ten on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.